Hey everybody, Courtney Smith here, and today I want to talk about the hidden banking crisis that nobody is talking about. But it's coming, probably in 2024, but it'll start this year. The Great Recession of 2008 first wiped out the savings and loan industry, which reduced dramatically the number of lending institutions in the United States. Then, the Treasury Department further consolidated the lending industry by moving bank assets, which are basically loans, into the largest banks. The 10 largest banks went from having 50% of banking assets to 75% of banking assets by 2009. Now, they were supposed to be worried about banks being too big to fail, but their solution was to make them even more too big to fail. So the number of lending institutions shrank by literally thousands of institutions. Yet loans kept increasing. Who's doing all this lending? Well, hedge funds. Hedge funds. Banks are highly regulated, which means two things. They have very high costs due to the regulation, and they can't lend as easily due to high reserve requirements. But hedge funds don't have either of these two constraints, so they can be more flexible in their terms. Number two, can make decisions quicker. Number three, can make loans more cheaply. And number four, don't have to report what they're doing. What they do is secret. So there's this massive pool of money, nobody knows how big, that has taken over much of the functions of normal banking. And these are called shadow banks. Shadow banks. Now, let's switch gears for a little bit and then come back. Commercial real estate loans are some of the areas that I believe will be a trigger for the next financial crisis. Right now, banks have about 70% of commercial real estate loans, but shadow banks have about 30%. Big commercial real estate firms turned negative in profits in 2022. The big Canadian commercial real estate company Brookfield stopped making payments on $734 million in just Los Angeles property loans, and the short sellers are targeting other big commercial real estate firms such as Vornado. A combination of higher interest rates, falling values, and tightening lending standards is bad for the commercial real estate industry. This is not an immediate crisis. It's not happening tomorrow, since the real estate companies actually still have lots of equity. They have to burn through that equity before there's a crisis. But the relentless attack on their business model by these several factors could lead to a crisis in 2024, with the beginning of it starting right now. As I mentioned, Brookfield is not making payments. So who are they borrowing from, these commercial real estate firms? You got it. Largely shadow banks. So here's the rub. Where do the shadow banks get their money from? Well, first, they do have equity investors. But they can't make enough money lending with just equity. So they have to go out and borrow and leverage up their balance sheets. And so the shadow banks go into the debt market, issue bonds, and they also go to banks and borrow money. So a shadow bank crisis could spread to the bond market and also to the large banks. Of course, the large banks would be bailed out by the Fed, but much of the money the shadow banks have borrowed is from overseas banks. So look for them to be hit even harder than the U.S. banks. The U.S. government has made these risks even worse due to the so-called Inflation Reduction Act and other fiascos. Those acts were set up to create private-public partnerships to create infrastructure or commercial real estate, but the public part has been largely lacking because governments have too much debt. So they've passed on concessions to the private shadow bankers to shoulder the extra burden, thus creating more risk in society. How much more risk? We don't know. They're called shadow banks because they operate in shadows, not in bright sunlight. In effect, there is a shadow bubble in shadow banks, and that will lead to a real debt crisis by the coming year. So all that cheap money that the Fed put out, the Inflation Reduction Act then turbocharged all that. And so as a result, shadow banks are in a bubble. But the bubble is coming due now. As the Fed raises interest rates, the bubble bursts. I've talked a lot about crypto and real estate and the stock market, and now I'm bringing to your attention the shadow bank bubble. So look for this to create into a crisis, maybe later this year, but definitely in 2024. So the question, of course, my question always is, how do we make money from this? Well, we could short sell the big commercial real estate firms. I've mentioned a couple of names in this video. That is the most direct way to do it. Now, you should also consider joining my Stock Navigator membership as a way of keeping track of how I'm going to actually do it and what my actual trades are going to be to make money from this shadow banking crisis. We'll talk to you later.